So as you look around the artifacts of our culture, you see, okay, well, these ordering principles are recognized. They're kind of inherent to how we have to understand the world. You look around at other sort of maps and things, and you find these symbols are still present, except they no longer have a metaphorical utility. They're no longer really symbolic. And you dig deep into the foundations, the history of our culture, to find that basically this sort of synonymous usage, as I was just showing you, this is a diagram of an Assyrian youth work camp with very sort of complex associations. So somehow we seem to have lost this cultural symbol. And with it, we get to know that time, space, and life is not for sale. We get to all know that together. But if we've lost the compass, it seems that we tend to forget. Now lately, as we're talking about sustainability and unsustainability, people have been arriving at the idea that perhaps a village, some sort of human scale living environment where we can be with other people, might be a model for a sustainable culture. And I think I just want to point out that there probably isn't a villager in the world that would ever say to you, oh, we're perfect. That wouldn't be much fun anyway. But a lot of people that, in our society, I hear criticizing the village, like, oh, we don't want to do that. We wouldn't want to go back to that. How Luddite would that be? And yet, there's so much to say about it. I mean, the difference between the rise of the city-state and its march across the planet and its violent sort of attack upon village-based cultures illustrates the difference between the city as an involuntary system and the village as a voluntary system. We'll get more deeply into this, but I just want to show how complex the issues can be. Here we have some conquistadores attacking the Inca here. And when we sort of were more broadly talking about this in educational settings, we were saying things like, as a society, okay, so you've apparently got the bad guys here and the good guys, right? They're invading them, and these guys are saying, give us the gold, give us the land, we want the stuff, give us your stuff. And they were going to take it by force and steal it and kill. But of course we know that both of these were empires, and they were both in the business of exploiting other people, so it's a little bit more complicated. But now we understand, because we're looking at it with a broader picture, that the only way that you can get someone to go out and attack other people and even murder them in order to take their stuff is by making them forget that they themselves were once villagers and that they themselves have forgotten their own story of the disruption of their own places, their own place-based communities. And so this cycle of forgetting and violence visited upon others continues through time. And this has a lot to do with, if you just look into your own family history, this has a lot to do with what happened to our compass. But I think what they're actually somewhere inside of themselves, what they're actually looking for on a personal level is the compass. Where's the compass? We need to know who we are. The king will kill us if we don't take your stuff. Okay, so city-states, like I totally celebrate urbanity. What we're talking about when we say city repair is that we're celebrating all of the benefits of urbanity. Everything that comes from us coming together and starting to share ideas, stories, songs, teaching each other how to speak, and everything that emerges from coming together at some place where our pathways intersect. So we, very much celebrate urbanity, but on the other hand, the rise of the city-state has a very, very dark side to it. So these kinds of geometries are what characterize colonialism, where just like Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, wherever you find the grid, flattened landscapes where the streams have been subsumed and long straight lines that separate private from public very distinctly, this is a product of a wave of colonialism that lands upon a place where previously there were sovereign First Nations. Now, we've been told that Thomas Jefferson invented the American grid, but in fact, he did not. In fact, what the Continental Congress did was simply copy what the Spanish were doing for hundreds of years before the National Land Ordinance of 1785 was even created. And before the Spanish, it had existed for 5,000 years. This is a drawing of the first foundations we've been able to find. It's an Assyrian container for conquered people. The Assyrians swept down and attacked people who were living in villages on these mounds called tells, and then they forced the surviving villagers to build this new environment. And what the Assyrians really liked about it was that they could position a sentry sort of diagonally all across this grid, and then each sentry could see down each one of the streets in all four directions because the landscape had been flattened and made straight. The gathering places which used to occur at most all of the intersections, widenings of the space where you would find the piazza or the platea or the platz or whatever you would call it, is where they used to be. But now this would be regimented, the people would be made to work, and hopefully, from the Assyrians' point of view, not to speak. It's moved across time, very aggressively across the planet. From the Assyrians, it went through Babylonia, Egypt, Greece, ultimately Rome, and then after the fall of the Western Empire, nobody would allow it to be built upon them for something like 800 years until the Spanish finally started to institute it in the Western Hemisphere upon the people of Mexico, Central, and South America. And it wasn't just that the grid is boring, a boring bunch of boxes, it's that it comes with a mentality that says, this unbroken ecology is now a commodity. The people who lived here, now no longer have rights of land ownership in that context or political participation. So this is the evidence. These lines drawn are the very geographic foundation of unsustainable culture. What is the difference between a village and a neighborhood grid? Again, the difference is between voluntary and involuntary. People travel pathways, their pathways will intersect, they tend to collect their housing into things like what we call blocks. But look at how different it can be in a place of deep, deep participation that is a reflection of the people who live there. For instance, here is a block, it's a cluster of places to live, and the center of the block is an opening. So these people don't have to come outside and say, hey, let's find some common ground around here. They literally get to practice being in common space throughout the course of every day of their lives. The intersections of the village are really all over the village. You see everywhere there is a place made at the crossing of pathways. This is a place for community interaction, cultural activity, commercial trade, throughout the course of every day of every year. There's planned things, there's cyclical things, and there's spontaneous activity all the time. And what's going on here is that every day there are grandmothers and grandfathers listening and watching. And as this thing adjusts and adapts, incorporating the highest knowledge that is new to the community, because it's all meant to be adaptable, they are tuning this like it's a great cultural lira through time. And as opposed to that, one of the truths of the grid is that almost nobody who's ever lived in the grid has ever met the people who drew the lines. It's designed to be inflexible, but look at how it works from the start. The opening that's supposed to be in the center of the block. And let me just back up. This might be an aerial view of a Dogon village in Mali, but it looks almost exactly like the villages of everyone here, your own ancestors, back to a certain point. This is how it more or less used to be. And again, it wasn't perfect, but we used to talk to each other. Over here, that space is somehow omitted from east to west coast. Oops, forgot. Oops, sorry about that. I mean, we tend to just want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Oh, the developers just forgot. It takes a long time to build culture. Actually not. At the intersection where our lives are supposed to converge, instead, this is a traffic corridor where at best you might collide with somebody else. Now, a lot of people say, hey, well, now hold on, wait a second, this is a pretty harsh critique. This provides a lot of connectivity. It's actually great for facilitating the movements of cars. No. Santa Barbara was laid out before cars existed. So was Portland, Oregon. Almost every grid in the world was laid out before cars existed. What's the deal?